Well, hello and welcome back to session 2 on our kind of journey of really discovering about parenting. What does God want from us and how do we parent our kids? And in session 1, we talked about a couple of things, but the thing I really want us to review and remind us is this, is over these weeks, we're going to be talking about principles and practices. I think we all want the cheat sheet. We all want to just give me the answer on how to raise really great, wonderful, highly exceptional, intelligent, well-behaved children. And unfortunately, we can't do that. There's no cheat sheet. There's no easy way to parenting because every child is unique and different. How they're wired, what motivates them, how they see the world. And then not only is every child unique and different, and perhaps if you have more than one child, you've seen that is, the strategy that you had for one kid all of a sudden doesn't work on the other child because they're wired differently, their motivations are different, their personality is different. And so not only are kids very unique and different, each of our families is unique and different. We have single parents, we have co-parents, we have step parents and blended families and traditional nuclear families and grandma and grandpa's raising kids. So every family is unique and we don't need to feel bad about that. We just need to understand where we're at so that we can really set a plan and a goal and be able to move forward to what we're going to call God's best. We really believe that God has the best for all of us. For each of our kids, God has a plan. And as a parent, it's our job to help our kids find God's plan for their life, to know God, to be great disciples of Jesus. So as we dive into this today, this session, we're going to talk about, I think, the thing that causes the most anxiety and the most questions when it comes to parenting, and it's this. How do I discipline my kid? I don't know if you're like me. I've spent many a night wondering, am I disciplining my kids correctly? But I don't want them to be 40 years old sitting in a therapist's office telling them how deeply dad wounded them when he disciplined them. And so, boy, we want to do it right. We want to be loving. We want to help shape our kids. And sometimes we're so nervous and so anxious about doing discipline wrong that we don't discipline at all. And I really want to help us to create some principles, some practices, but also more importantly, a plan so that we can lovingly discipline our children and help them to become all that God has for them, to help them to be well-adjusted adults. So when they launch into the world, they can be really highly successful. So we're going to talk about two things. We're calling this session's talk direct and correct. Direct and correct. And most of the time when we think about discipline, we only think about the correction side of discipline. And over our time together here, I really want to help us as parents to understand that we can head off a lot of correcting if we have a lot of great directing. Now, directing, when you think of a director, what does a director do? They're the ones that lay out a film or a movie or a TV show. They know the direction. They know where the story arc is going, and they're responsible to help make that play out in all the different organizations. Or maybe you think about an orchestra, a band, right? Who's standing up at the beginning? It's the conductor, and what's he doing? He's directing the musicians so that they all play in harmony and in rhythm and time together. And as a parent and the leaders of our home, it's much like that. We need to be directing the rhythms and the timings and the feel so that our family comes together on mission and purpose and values. And so often, all we think about as parents is trying to discipline. And we're just running around trying to stop this kid from doing that kid from doing that kid from doing that. And sometimes it's needed, but most of the time it's overwhelming. So I'm inviting us to kind of take a step back and say, how do we direct our families? How do we direct them? And in the scriptures, Proverbs 22:6 says this: start a child off in the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And so the things we're talking about, ideally, really the God's best, we talk about that last session is understanding God's best. It's God's best is that the minute our children are born, the minute our children come into our home if they're adopted, whatever it would be, the minute that we take responsibility of them is what happens is we begin to shape a directing plan in their lives. And it's much easier if you start very young. These principles we're going to talk about, they are so much easier to apply with a 6-month-old child than they are with a 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. But there's hope. It's easier when they're young, but it's never too late. It's never too late. Even kind of the story of my family. My parents met Jesus when, right as I was being born. And I have an older brother who's about 10 years older than me. And he'll tell you the stories of, there was one set of rules in our family. My 2 older brothers, one's about 10 and one's 7 years older than me. And when he was 10 years old, he can remember, my parents met Jesus and all of a sudden the rules changed in our home and it kind of threw him for a loop. The things that were acceptable yesterday were no longer acceptable today. And so it was a journey for our family to really understand what it means. And so wherever you find yourself, maybe you have young kids, maybe you have teenagers, maybe you have preteens, whatever it would be, you're going to have to implement these things at different places. You're going to have to do the hard work of implementing these things into your family. But take courage. It's never too late. God can redeem. God can restore any situation. And so when we talk about discipline, this is probably the most famous passage in the Bible about discipline. It's Proverbs 13:24, and it says this: a refusal to correct is a refusal to love. Love your children by disciplining them. A refusal to correct is a refusal to love. Love your children by disciplining. How many times is the word love in there? It's repeated over and over and over and over again. And one of the things as parents, I just want to tell you that one of the best, most loving things you can do for your children is to direct and correct them. It's part of your responsibility. And in our culture, we've kind of done love a disservice. We've equated love with this. We've separated love from discipline. And it's really been this. Loving me means let me doing and letting me be whoever I want to be. But really, that is spoiling a child. And so sometimes when we're thinking, man, I don't want to correct my kid, sometimes, according to the scriptures, according to God's plan, what we're doing is we're actually withholding love. And that's really different than the culture around us. And it's hard for us to understand it. And it's a different philosophy and an understanding and a worldview of what it means when we really say the best way that I can love my child is to lovingly discipline them. And so just letting your kid do and be whoever they want to be, that's a refusal to love sometimes. So we need to both correct and direct our children. As parents, we have a responsibility to direct and correct. The most loving thing we can do for our kids is to say no and to lay out healthy boundaries and responsibility for them, to create healthy boundaries for them where they can be safe and they can be honored and they can grow in a safe place. So here's just some basic principles. We're kind of diving out of some principles. You're going to think, how is that connected to discipline? But I'm going to talk about the goals, the mission. This is part of the directing part of your home. If you have some of the directing things, I really believe if you direct well, you avoid a lot of discipline. You head it off before it even happens. So for our home, here's some things that we've discovered is we have family rules. We have family rules. And you would think that this list is probably like 15, 20 rules. But you know how many family rules we have? We have 2. We have 2 family rules. And here's our family rules. First one is this: thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not lie. And you think, well, why would that be the most important rule? Well, here's why it's the most important rule. Because every relationship, whether it's between a husband and a wife, parents and children, between siblings, between coworkers, between friends, between us and God, is based on trust. Trust is the glue that holds relationships together. And when we lie, it breaks trust. And so as a parent, one of the things we need to help our children is to help them not lie, to tell the truth so that we can build trust. Because trust is going to be the thing that is going to help them navigate the world. It's going to be the thing that's going to help them have healthy relationships. So it's rule number 1 in our home: thou shalt not lie. We learned this from a great mentor, and they use this rule, and he tells a story that one time they were driving around when their kids were young, and one of their kids was lying, and he looked at them and said, remember, thou shalt not lie. That's the worst thing that you can do in our home. And one of their other children was sitting, he's about 6 years old, and he just starts thinking, and he goes, are you sure that lying's the worst thing that you can do? And he goes, yeah, it's the worst thing. And then the kid thinks about it for a minute, and he goes, well, what about worshiping Satan? And mom and dad just started laughing and said, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is worshiping Satan is worse than telling a lie. But that's one of the most important things that we need to do is to not tell lies, to have things built on trust. And the second rule is this: thou shalt honor your mommy. So don't tell a lie, and thou shalt honor your mommy. And people think, well, why would that be the most important rule? Well, there's a couple things. One is we're raising some sons. And I want my sons to be known as people who, that are trustworthy and who honor and respect women. I think it's so important, the things that have been going on in our culture the last few years of Me Too movements, of realizing how poorly men have treated women. I want our home to be a place where my sons are trained and honored and directed to be men of honor and who treat with women with the utmost respect. Now, we're also raising a daughter. And I want my daughter to be so comfortable in a safe and honoring environment that if she finds herself, in college or high school or wherever it would be as she grows up, when she's in an environment or she's with a person who doesn't honor and respect her, she's going to think, this is weird. I'm out of here. And I really believe that that's going to protect her. That's going to be one of the most important things that I can do for my daughter is to create an environment where when she's not honored and respected, it will feel so foreign and odd that she says, I'm out of here. And so that's why we say, hey, honor mom and don't tell a lie. So those are the two important rules. Now you would think like, come on, Tim, don't you have other rules about chores, about curfews, about, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. Sure, those are values in our home, but here I want to create a real important distinction here. Those aren't rules, those are responsibilities. And I think sometimes we get in trouble because we make responsibilities into rules. But part of our job as parents is to train kids who are responsible. And so making a rule a responsibility, it doesn't help really make the responsibility being important, because doing the dishes is something you don't have to do just because you're a kid. Doing the dishes is something you have to do when you use dishes. And so that's why it's not a rule, that's a responsibility. So those are our two family rules. And then the second thing is we have family goals. And this is some of the most important things if you want to be able to direct your family, direct your children, is you have to know where you're going. You have to know where you're leading your family. And the first family goal we have for this is that we are on a mission. My wife and I, Anna, we've been married for nearly 20 years. And here's the thing we need to remember. When we got married because we had a mission. We had similar interest, vision, and values for our life. And so long before we had children, we were on a mission together. And for us, our mission involves serving Jesus and serving the local church. That's been what we've been called to. That's the uniqueness of our family. And so what is the mission of your family? And when our kids came into the family, our kids joined our mission. Mom and dad didn't stop having a life and mission for the kids to fulfill their mission. No, the children joined our mission. And so the goals of our family is that our children will join the mission that God has given Anna and myself in our journey of pursuing life, of loving each other and accomplishing the things that God has for us. So have you taken time to really lay some family goals out? The second goal that we have is this. We want to raise children who feel accountable to God and who seek his best or his will for their lives. We want to raise kids who are responsible to God. So we're going to do all kinds of things in how we spiritually direct our kids so that they feel responsible to God. I'm not responsible for their spiritual life. I want to help them be responsible for their spiritual life. And I want them to know that God has a plan for them and them not to miss it. And the third goal is this, that when our kids have grown and they have launched out into life, and Anna and I are much older, that our kids want to come back and see us. that we don't have to beg them, we don't have to pay for their airplane tickets, but that our family, their memories, the things in our home would be so exciting that our kids would want to come back and be with mom and dad, and they would want to be with their siblings. And so that's the goal. We're really starting with the end in mind. And if you have young kids at home, it feels like the longest season of your life is having little children at home. And I remember for us, having toddlers, having 3 kids under 5, 6 years old, it feels like this will never end. But as our kids are getting ready to launch into life, as we're beginning to see that actually your children at home are the shortest season of your parenting journey. The longest season of your parenting journey are your kids as adults out on their own. And so we want to create that in mind so that when it's all said and done, our kids want to come home and be with us. So we have some rules and we have some goals. Now, we need to know where we're at. We need to know where we're at so we can know how to implement these things. And I really think that there's 4 stages of kids' development. Now, experts in child development would definitely have some more specific things. This is just general, but I think this helps us kind of give a framework on how to navigate and how to implement these plans and principles into kids' lives where they find themselves. And the first season of life is this. We're going to call it the discipline years, from about age 1 to age 5. That verse in Proverbs says, start a children off on the way they should, when they're young, on the way they should go, and it will not depart from them. These early years are when you can direct and correct a lot of the trajectory of your children's lives. So this is about bedtime. This is about structure. This is about respect. This is about honor, of really disciplining your kids. And these are the kind of what I call the tiring years of parenting, where you're chasing after your kids. They're learning to walk. They're doing their first things, learning to ride their bikes, learning to do all these things. And so you're kind of running after them. And this is, I think, a dangerous time when all of a sudden the kids can run your home because their sleep schedules kind of determine when you can go out, and they need to eat when they need to eat. And it's like, whoa, what happened? We used to have to be able to have dinner at 7 o'clock, and now this kid needs to eat at 4:30 and be in bed by 7. Or so you're figuring these things out. But these are the disciplining years where you're really laying the foundation of how things should go for the rest of our life. The second season is what we're going to call the training years, and this is from about age 5 to age 12. This is where you're directing and you're shaping thinking. We're beginning to develop healthy patterns. This is where kids need to understand that there's responsibilities that they need to be responsible for, not just because it's a rule, but like brushing your teeth, doing the dishes, some family chores, some being a part of the family is just part of the responsibility as you're growing and maturing. Now, this next season is the coaching years. This is what we're going to call the teen years, from about 12 to 18. And this can even go on, I think, to the early 20s in a lot of ways. And this is where as parents, we're more on the sideline in our kids. In these early years, man, we're with our kids. We're involved in the PTA. We're going to preschool. We're helping them. When our children need help with their homework, moms and dads, we're building their project for them in 4th grade. These kind of things, we're really actively involved. And we move into the coaching years as they become teenagers. All of us and their kids begin to have their own lives, their own friends. They're spending more time away from the home. And so this is where we play more of the role as coach versus disciplinarian. Because if you try to just come down on kids and be like, this is the way it is, teenagers, there's this thing called rebellion, right? They can run away. They have more will of their own, more ability to do those things. So you have to understand you're a coach on the sideline. And so you're kind of giving wisdom to them, but ultimately it's the kids' responsibility, the children's responsibility to implement that in their life. And then adulthood years, 18, early 20s on to adulthood, this is really what we're going to call the friendship years. And this is where you can't look at your kids anymore and say, do this because I told you. Or if you live under my house, you have to follow these rules. As kids begin to move out and launch into life, we really become peers with them at some way. And it's the friendship years. And this is the longest season of parenting. And I really believe that if we do these early years well, if we do the discipline years well, we do the training years well, we do the coaching years well, that ultimately we can do the friendship years well, really, really well. And that's our goal. That's our hypothesis that we want to move forward. So How do we discipline our kids? How do we move these ways? Seems like, Tim, you're spending a lot of time talking about this directing part, but I really believe it. And here's a huge worldview understanding that we need to understand if we're going to be parents and we're a church. We're talking about God's best, how God structures and organizes parenting, what God wants for us. And here's just a huge thing that we need to understand is that your wonderful, beautiful, amazing, above average, sweet, gifted, wonderful, amazing child is a big fat sinner. It's hard to wrestle with that. But our children, we love them so much that we just think they're so amazing and so gifted. But really the scriptures tell us the worldview of God's economy tells us that every human being is broken and affected by sin. Jeremiah 17:9 says this, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" Who can understand it? Our kids are broken sinners. They're not perfect. They're going to disappoint us. They're going to sin. They're going to make mistakes. And it is a hard thing for us to understand. And if we come with the premises of, man, my kids are so sweet and wonderful and kind, which I know your kids are. Our kids are great. They're wonderful. They're gifted. They're talented. But also, they're broken. They're affected by sin. And that's going to shape their lives. And so we need to understand that. And as parents, sometimes I've really seen parents who don't understand that their kids are sinners. When their kids misbehave, when their kids hurt them, when their kids disrespect them, when their kids tell them a lie, it's actually devastating for the parents. And they think, where did this come from? How can this be? And it actually affects the parents at an emotional level, and it kind of cuts their knees off, and they don't even know how to parent. But I think if we come from the premise of, yeah, we live in a broken world that's been broken by sin, and my child is broken by sin, and they're a sinner, when our child misbehaves, when they lie to us, when they don't tell the truth, we're not shocked. We're kind of like, yep, okay, now we need to help direct and correct this behavior away from them, because if they continue it, it will be destructive. And we have to just come to grips with our kids aren't perfect. Our children, one of our favorite stories is one of our kids when they were in second grade was running an extortion ring with all of their friends, was extorting money from their friends. In second grade, we found out about it. One of the moms called us and said, "I'm so sorry, your family's in need. Could we help you? Could we offer some financial support to you?" And we're like, what's going on? I think we're doing okay. And it comes out one of our kids is at home telling everybody how poor we are and how they can't get a new fancy computer tablet thing and that they need to give to them so that they can get this tablet. And it's just because our kid who's a sinner wants something that we said no to them. And so they're going to their friends telling them how poor we are, and they extorted $38 from their friends, halfway to their financial goal of getting this thing. And as a parent, we could be embarrassed and ashamed, and we were. It was not awesome. But it didn't devastate us. We're just like, yep, our child's a sinner. They wanted something that we said no to, and so they went and found a way to get it themselves. And so we had to be really creative and say, boy, we want that to not be shaped in our child's heart. So your child's a sinner. What motivates each kid? A parent's responsibility is to understand what motivates your sinful child's heart and how do we direct and correct them towards good behavior, towards being honest, towards telling the truth and not moving towards lies. So 3 things that must be disciplined. It can be overwhelming. I know in the early years of even me being a father, I wanted my kids to be so good. And so I spent all these times like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. You can be exhausted trying to discipline everything. And so this helped me when I heard this information, it helped me is just that there's 3 things that we're going to discipline. And these are the 3 things that we're going to discipline. And the first one is disobedience. When we tell our children, when a child is told, you need to do this by this time, and they understand, it's clearly defined, and they just don't do it, that needs to be corrected. That needs to be disciplined. Because why? Our goal is to create healthy children. And if one day the boss at work, when they're 29 years old, says, I need you to do this by this time, at this time, and they just choose to be like, I don't want to do it, they're going to get fired, right? So that's why we're creating this. We're going to discipline disobedience. Second thing is we're going to discipline is dishonesty. And that goes back to telling the truth. Thou shalt not tell a lie. Because if we can't trust our kids, it's really hard. It is really, really hard to have a healthy home. And so we're gonna discipline dishonesty. And the third one is disrespect. And that goes back even to our family rule, thou shalt honor our mommy. We want our children to be respectful and honoring of those in authority above them. So I want them to be good students. When the teacher says something at school, they say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I want them to be respectful of those people around them. So getting down to discipline. How do we do this? How do we discipline them? And so we're going to talk about some skills and principles for correcting. And the first one is creative discipline. We must be creative in our discipline. So, there's all different philosophies of discipline, from spanking to timeouts to withholding things to being grounded to all these different things. And one of the things I'm going to challenge you is you have to know your kid. You have to think about what motivates them. And, if timeout works for one of your kids because they're socially motivated. And so being with people is what they want to be with all the time. And so you say, go to your room because you're in trouble. That's devastating for them. And they're like, no, I want to behave so I can be out with people. But you tell your kid who loves reading books and is fine being in their room and just creatively paints and is okay, being by themselves. You say, you're grounded. You need to go to your room for 10 minutes. They're like, awesome. This is the best. Thank you for disciplining me. This is so helpful. I don't have to worry about brothers and sisters. I'm just at peace in my own room. So that's not an effective discipline. You have to be creative in your discipline and think about it. And parents, here's one of the things that we often wonder is how do I know if I'm disciplining correctly? One is this: never discipline out of anger. When we're disciplining out of anger, our motivation for discipline is what? It's love. We're disciplining out of love. And so sometimes our children can make us very angry. We can be emotional, we can be angry. So one thing I would really encourage you to do is learn to step away from the situation. Get control of your emotions. Take a deep breath. If you're parenting, if you have a co-parent, a mother, a father, a spouse, somebody who's with you, take a deep breath and be like, talk me off the edge, talk me off the edge. And then come back, even if they're young children, don't discipline out of anger, discipline out of love. And so that means that we take a deep breath and we think through, okay, why is my children doing this? How do I creatively help them to steer away from this behavior? Because I want something better for them, because my goal is to raise kids who are responsible to God. So I say this behavior, this disobedience, this lying, this disrespect needs to be corrected, because if they continue this behavior, it will ultimately wreak destruction in their lives. And so we need to address this. So take a deep breath. Let the anger subside. And then come back and find a way to discipline out of love. And true loving discipline, this should be a measure for all of us as parents. True loving discipline should cost a parent something. True loving discipline should cost you something. It should cost you time. It should cost you emotion. It should cost you energy. And that's a real measure of whether we're disciplining out of love. Because if we're disciplining out of anger, we're just like, we're snapping, and then we're withdrawing. But real loving discipline costs me something as a parent. And this is often why we're not good at discipline, is because we're overwhelmed, we're stressed out, we're at the end of our rope, we've come home after a busy day, and our kids are misbehaving, and so we just want to fix it and move on. But true loving discipline has to cost you something. It has to cost you intention and purpose. One of the things for one of our children in their early years is I just realized there was a fierce independence in them, and they just wanted to be by themselves. And they would act out with that. They would show disrespect. They would show dishonor. They'd be disobedient just because they wanted to do their own way. And so creatively, I just thought, okay, how do I break this behavior in my child? How do I discipline this? And so for this particular child, I discovered that they had to stay within 3 feet of me for 24 hours straight. And it was the most painful 24 hours for them. But you know what? It was painful for me too. It cost me something. So like when I'm at the bathroom, they're having to stand right outside the door and wait for me until I'm done. It's kind of embarrassing and horrible. But let me tell you, that changed my kids' behavior. When we were walking around, I'm doing chores. They had to sit by me. I brought them to work and there was a chair that was 3 feet from me. I made them sleep on the floor right next to me in bed. They were just like, oh my goodness, I can't handle this anymore. And it helped correct the behavior. And that was creative discipline. And it cost me something, but it helped create and change the atmosphere in our home and the behavior of our children. So you have to be creative in your discipline. Outthink your children. A couple of things on discipline. I've seen people that make this mistake. In an attempt to discipline one child, you discipline the whole family. And that's not fair. Have you ever worked in a work environment and the manager's mad because one person's not producing and they come and discipline the whole department? That just makes you so frustrated and so angry. So we have to say, hey, what's a discipline that we can actually live out? Like, all right, no TV for a month in our whole home. And the kids who've been behaving well, they're like, great, we're suffering because Johnny's bad behavior. And that makes them frustrated and angry. Can you go without watching TV for a month? Like, are you disciplining yourself? And you have to think about disciplines that you can actually follow through on. You know, you're grounded for a week. You're grounded for a month. You know, you can't do this. You're going to withhold this from you. And then the reality, what happens? We get tired and we get worn out. And so we say, oh yeah, it's good enough. And so we lift the restriction. And so what's the pattern we're creating with our kids? They just got to outlast you. If you say something else like, mom and dad will give up. They say I'm grounded for a month. After 2 days, they'll get tired and they'll give up. And so you have to say, hey, what's a discipline that I can follow through? When they're young, you have to say, boy, it takes so much energy to raise those kids in those early years. And so disciplines, you have to say, can I actually have the energy, the wherewithal to follow through on the discipline? Because consistency is going to be the thing that's most important, because your kids will read your number. They got your mail. If they sniff out inconsistency in you, you have lost the game. So create disciplines that you can actually follow through on. So that's some of the discipline thing. Now I want to talk about correcting. How do we direct our kids so that we actually avoid a lot of discipline? I believe if we're smart, if we lead our families well, we lead our children well, we can direct them, we can lead our families and our children ahead of times. So for us, some of the things we discovered in those early years was we just had some wise people tell us, put your kids to bed at 8 o'clock at the latest. And so for us, it was just like, we were that way when our kids were young. They were in bed at 8 o'clock. And you know what it did? It was the best thing for our marriage, because we had a couple hours before we went to bed where we got to connect, we got to talk, we got to watch a show together, just process our days. And when your kids are young, it is full throttle all the time. And so we didn't read to our kids for 2 hours. They didn't get another drink of water. It was not a belonged process of whatever. And even in our home, the culture is your bedrooms are for sleeping. So when you go to your room, it is sleeping time. It's not time to keep the lights on and read for 3 hours and all those things, just because, man, you're going to bed at 8 o'clock. And then as our kids started getting to school age and, we had church activities and different things, it became 8:30. But still, our kids, it's amazing, as teenagers, most of them, they're like ready to go to bed at 8:30. They shut down. They're now saying like, oh, it's 8:30, I'm time to go to bed. Our son, when he turned 15 years old, he was like a freshman in high school, and he came to us. He's like, hey, mom and dad, I don't know, I'm 15 and I'm in high school now. Would it be possible for me to stay up till 9 o'clock? I hear that all my friends like stay up till 10 and 10:30, and can I stay up till 9? And we're just laughing, thinking like, yeah, you can stay up till 9. But he had no idea that kids stayed up till 10:30 or 11 at night. He just thought every kid went home to bed at 8:30. And it's just the culture of our home. And I can't tell you how much a well-rested child behaves so much better. And in the busy, frantic life we live, our kids are not designed to get up at 5 a.m. and go to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock. They need hours of sleep. Talk to scientists, talk to doctors. Kids need a lot of sleep. And even in their adolescent years, they need a lot of sleep to grow and be healthy. I remember our youngest, when it was her first time to go to school, to all-day school. For the first couple of weeks of school, we would come back and this demon child would come home. It was like, what happened to this kid? This is a demon child that's taken over our kid. The nights would be crazy in our home. And we realized this poor child's exhausted because they've been at school all day. And so we quickly developed this pattern. You came home, we gave you a snack, we said, hi, I love you, and you went upstairs for a nap. And 45 minutes later, this sweet, amazing, loving child came down, and it was like, the child's been changed. It's so amazing because they took a nap. They were hungry and they were tired. And so we could have spent so much time and energy fighting with that kid every night, but they were just so tired. And so when we developed that half hour, 40-minute of nap, it changed everything. And it only took about 2 or 3 years before they grew enough and they're like, they didn't need their nap anymore at the end of school. This one's gonna be funny, but stick with me. Family rule. Here's a philosophy, something we have is we don't negotiate with terrorists and we don't negotiate with children. Again, we don't negotiate with terrorists and we don't negotiate with children. And here's why. You can see a lot of parents negotiating with kids. And as they get to teenagers, boy, you need to have more dialogue and things like that. But when they're young, don't start the negotiation rule. Because here's why. You're going to lose every negotiation. Because as a parent, when this child was in your home, when God blessed this child in your home, whatever way that child came in, your heart automatically went towards love. You love them. You are wired to love them. And your child is wired to leave you. You're wired to love them. They're wired to be like, okay, I'm getting out of here when I'm 18 years old. And that's good, and we want that. Do you remember when you were 18, 19, 20 years old, and it was time for you to leave the home? You were like, whoopee, freedom! Your 5-year-old can't express it, but that's wired into them. It's how God made them to launch into the world. So don't negotiate with your children because you will lose every negotiation. Here's an really important principle. Don't bail, let them fail. Don't bail, let them fail. This is a huge lesson in life. Life is not fair. What do you do in unjust leadership? You know, our kids are in the public school system, and we've had some amazing, great, phenomenal teachers. We've had some teachers that it's their first year teaching. They're 22, 23 years old, coming out of college, trying to figure it out. They love our kids, but sometimes they don't know some things. And we've had some teachers that, their contract didn't get renewed the next year. And my kids would come home and be like, get me out of this class. This teacher's not fair. They're mistreating me. They're doing all this thing. And you know what our instinct was as parents was to run down to the school and say, get our kids in the best class. We want the best teachers for our kids because our kids are so wonderful and amazing and intelligent and above average. But we fought our instinct and thought, hey, this is a great lesson. So what does a 4th grader do with unjust leadership? What does a 4th grader do with a teacher that they don't really connect with? Boy, they're going to figure out, if they can figure this out in 4th grade, think how successful they're going to be in the marketplace. Because anybody ever worked for a boss that you just didn't connect with? And you have to figure, it's a skill. It's an emotional, it's a social skill to learn to navigate. And our instinct is to want to run in and bail our kids out. And when they're young, we need to have safe places for our kids to fail. And if we run and we bail them out of every failure, they don't learn. Recently, I was talking to a family, and they have several adult children in their early 20s, and they're kind of struggling to launch into life. And they were just kind of discussing why that is. And in just discussions, I just realized that dad really wanted them to launch, but every time mom runs in and bails them out. And so that staying at home is really comfortable. It's really easy because it's their safety net. And so they're not having the courage to step up and be launched because they're still getting bailed out in their early 20s. Several years ago, we had an opening here at the church, and I thought we had a really great candidate. She was in her early 20s. I thought, man, this is going to be a great candidate. I met with her, thought it was so phenomenal. And she came in for the formal interview, and her mom came with her to the interview. And her mom walked in the room with the interview with her, and I'm like, What's going on? I had to call a timeout. And I actually had to ask the mom to leave the room. And she's like, oh, no, I really want to be here because I think my kid's this is a great possibility and a great job for her. And let's just say she didn't get the job. Huh? Like, what's going on? Your 20-year-old, they got to be able to be in an interview by themselves. Don't bail, let them fail. Define what you're for and not what you're against. This is just so important as a family, that you have to be about what you're for and what you're against, especially in the world we're living in right now. There are so many political views, social unrest. There's all these different things going on. And especially if you're attempting to raise Christian children, the temptation, the easy way is just say, hey, here's all the things we're against. We don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this. This is what we're against, this is what we're against, this is what we're against. But to really raise healthy, productive adults, you have to teach them what you're for. And so if you're for Jesus, you teach them about Jesus and you teach them about the kingdom of God. The old saying goes, right? How do they teach a bank teller to know the difference between counterfeit and real money? They don't give them all the counterfeit money. They give them real, genuine American currency. And they count it and they know how it feels. They know and the minute that counterfeit comes into a pile, that's different. That's not authentic. That's not real. And in the same way as we're raising children, we need to teach them what we're for. And so when they're out in life, when they're in their freshman college with 300 kids at a liberal university, when they're in the workforce, when they're doing these things and they run into all these different things, because we can't teach them about everything that we're against because it's changing all the time, right? You can never keep up with all the stuff out there you don't want your kids to do. But you teach them the authentic, genuine. And when they run into something that's not authentic, that's not true, that's not genuine, they'll spot it and they'll be like, no, that's not what I'm for. And they'll quickly adjust and change. And so there's some other things that I really want to talk about is that our job as parents is not merely to just spend all of our time disciplining our kids. Really, if you want to raise children who follow Jesus, you have to understand that this is part of your responsibility. It's not to just discipline your kids, your children, but to disciple them. To disciple them. And really what we can look as a model for that is Jesus himself. Jesus had these 12 disciples, and they were kind of unique characters. They came from all different walks of life, different personalities. You can read the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are filled with stories about them. And they were all unique, and they were all different. And Jesus just didn't spend all of his time correcting them. He spent a lot of his time teaching them. And in that teaching, it produced men and women and the gospel. We're here today learning about the things of God because of those 12 individuals who were taught by Jesus. And so teach your children, direct them, correct them, love them enough to tell them the things that they need to see. And in Proverbs 27:12, this is one of my all-time favorite proverbs. It says this: the prudent, the wise, see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. And so as a parent, it's your job to see ahead. It's your job to direct, to see ahead and be like, there's danger there. And I need to direct my children to go in a different way. I need to direct our home to go in a different way. But the unwise, what do? They see danger and like, hey, we're going to keep going. I'm just going to discipline this out of them. So discipline's important. It's loving. But also directing, I think, is just as important. So be a good director and be a good discipliner and be creative in all those things in our lives. I want to pray for you as we end our session today that God would give you creativity and wisdom as you correct and direct your home. So Lord, I pray for each parent. And God, thank you for the gift of our children. And Lord, whatever season we're in, whether they're little, whether they're in the middle, whether they're adults, Lord, I know even parenting doesn't end when they leave our home. God, our kids need coaching and friendship and wisdom. Lord, I pray that you would give us wisdom and creativity to understand what's going on in our kids' hearts, about how they're wired, what's unique about them, what motivates them, how you, God, have knit them together in their mother's womb uniquely, how they see the world, their creativity, their gifts. Lord, some are good at sports, some are good at music, some are good at art, some have gifts that we're yet to define what they are. But Lord, it's our job as parents to help our children become disciples of you. So Lord, I pray for wisdom and discipline. Lord, I pray for parents who instinctually, they discipline out of anger. God, would you give us the patience, the wisdom to take a breath? And Lord, respond versus react. And Lord, would we understand that loving discipline costs us something? Give us wisdom and creativity. And then Lord, I pray that we would have a mission, a vision, that we would direct our homes in the way that you've called us, given a vision for our future. Lord, I pray that each family would have plans, would have goals, would have some rules that would shape how they think, would shape how they move forward. And Lord, thank you for each parent. Thanks for the gift of our children, and give us creativity to lovingly correct and discipline and direct our children in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, I'm excited for session 3.